And that's how the fight started with my mother-in-law a few years ago. I thought it would be good idea to purchase a cemetery plot as a birthday present for my mother-in-law. The following year, I didn't get her a present. She was not too happy about this and questioned why I didn't get her a present. I responded, "Well, you still haven't used the birthday present which I purchased for you last year." And that's how the fight started. A woman decided to divorce her husband and hired a divorce lawyer. They were in the courtroom when the judge asked her to take the stand. The courtroom fell silent as the judge adjusted their glasses and addressed her. "Mrs. Johnson, can you please explain to the court why you're seeking a divorce?" She nodded confidently, leaned into the microphone, and said, "Your Honor, it's because my husband and I are too compatible." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Too compatible? Don't you mean incompatible?" "No, Your Honor," she replied firmly. "I meant exactly what I said. We're exactly alike. I love movies. He loves movies. I adore Mexican food. He can't get enough of it. Hiking, yoga, politics, religion. Everything matches perfectly." The judge looked puzzled. "I'm sorry, but I still don't see the problem." She leaned in closer and whispered, "The problem is, we both love men." A senior citizens group charters a bus for an overnight casino trip. An elderly woman comes up to the bus driver and says, "I've just been molested." The driver felt that she had fallen asleep and had a dream. So he tells her to go back to her seat and sit down. A short time later, another old woman comes forward and claims that she was just flirted. The driver thought he had a busload of old wackos. But who would be flirting with these old ladies? About 10 minutes later, a third old lady comes up and says that she had been too. The bus driver decides that he'd had enough and pulls into the first rest area. When he turns the lights on and stands up, he sees an old man on his hands and knees crawling in the aisles. "Hey, Gramps, what are you doing down there?" says the bus driver. "I lost my toupee. I thought I found it 3 times, but every time I tried to grab it, it gets up and runs away." During his Sunday sermon, the preacher focused on the topic, "Forgive your enemies." After delivering a long message, he asked the congregation how many were willing to forgive their enemies. About half raised their hands. Not satisfied, he preached for another 20 minutes and asked again. This time, around 80% responded affirmatively. Still not content, he went on for another 15 minutes before posing the question one more time. With thoughts of Sunday lunch on everyone's mind, nearly every hand went up, except for one elderly lady at the back. "Mrs. Jones, are you not willing to forgive your enemies?" he asked. "I don't have any," she replied. "Mrs. Jones, that's quite remarkable. How old are you?" 93. "Mrs. Jones, please come up here and tell the congregation how someone can live to 93 and not have a single enemy." Slowly, the sweet old lady made her way to the front, turned around and said, "It's simple. I just outlived the..." A man was sitting at work when his phone rang. Woman on the phone. "Are you single?" Man confused. "Yes, but who's this?" Woman. "Your wife. Come home today and I'll explain." Before he could process, another call came in from a different number. Woman. "Are you married?" Man. "Yes, but who's this?" Woman. "Your girlfriend? You liar! You cheat!" Man, panicking. "Sorry, baby. I thought you were my wife." The woman chuckled wickedly. "I am your wife. Just wait till you get home. I've got some arrangements for you." An elderly pope arrives in New York and is picked up at the airport by a limousine. Upon seeing the car, he gestures to the driver and says, "Could I ask you a favor?" The driver, astonished, replies, "A favor from the Pope? Of course, anything." "Well," says the Pope, "I don't get to drive much, and I'd love the chance to drive now. Would you let me take the wheel?" The driver is taken aback. What if the Pope gets into an accident? But he feels he can't refuse His Holiness, so he reluctantly agrees and lets the Pope take the driver's seat. To his shock, the Pope starts the car, revs the engine, and speeds off, leaving a trail of rubber on the road. He zooms through the streets, well over 100 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone. Soon, a police car pulls up beside them and signals for the limo to stop. The Pope slams on the brakes, coming to a screeching halt, with the police car following suit. The officer steps out, peers inside the limo, and then quickly steps back. He radios his sergeant. "Sir, I've got a situation." The sergeant replies, "What's the problem?" The officer hesitates. "Well, I pulled over this driver for speeding, but he's really important." "Important like the mayor?" asked the sergeant. "No, much more important than that." "The governor?" "Much more than that." "The president?" "Even more important than him." The sergeant, confused, asks, "Who's more important than the president?" The officer responds, "I'm not sure, Sarge, but he has the Pope driving for him." A wealthy old man was lying on his deathbed when it occurred to him that he had never made a will, so he called his lawyer to help him draft one. The next day, the lawyer arrived, and the old man said, "I want 25% of my money to go to charity. After all, I've taken so much. I should give something back." "How generous of you," the lawyer replied. "I'll make sure that happens right away. I also want 25% to go to my son. He's been waiting for the day he could get his hands on my money," the old man added. "Okay, I'll make sure he gets 25%, the lawyer responded. "And the rest should go to my wife, on the condition that she remarries after I die," the old man said. The lawyer, a bit puzzled, asked, "Okay, I'll make sure that happens. But may I ask why you want her to remarry? It's a rather unusual request." The old man grinned and said, "I want to make sure at least one man regrets my death." Earlier today, while shopping, I picked up some chicken legs and couldn't resist having a little fun. Just before the young cashier rang them up, I asked, "Do you know if these are front or back legs?" She paused, gave the package a good look, and when she couldn't find the answer said, "I don't know. Let me go ask my manager." A few minutes later, she came back, gave me a straight-faced look, and said, "Not funny." I chuckled. "Sorry, but I thought it was." Then the guy behind me, laughing hysterically, shouted, "Not funny? It was hilarious." Wishing you all a great week. Little Johnny brought home his history test result. It was 90. His father was so happy with it. However, his mother, Karen, just couldn't believe her son got 90 in history. After taking a closer look at the marks, she found that the handwriting style of the 9 and the 0 are different. "Johnny, you are so busted. Tell me, did you add the 0 to your marks?" "No, Mum, I didn't." "I am asking you once more, did you add that 0 to your marks?" "Mum, no, I didn't add that 0. "Okay, as you're not telling the truth, you are grounded for 1 month." "Mum, no. Please, no, I really didn't add that 0. This is your last chance, kid. Tell me the truth." "I just added the 9 to it." A man in his mid-40s bought a new BMW and was out on the interstate for a nice evening drive. The top was down. The breeze was blowing through what was left of his hair, and he decided to see what the engine had. As the needle jumped up to 80 miles per hour, he suddenly saw flashing red and blue lights behind him. There's no way they can catch a BMW, he thought to himself, and opened her up further. The needle hit 90, then 100, and finally reality hit him and he knew he shouldn't run from the police. So he slowed down and pulled over. The cop came up to him, took his license without a word, and examined it and the car. "It's been a long day. This is the end of my shift, and it's Friday the 13th. I don't feel like more paperwork, so if you can give me an excuse for your driving that I haven't heard before, you can go." The guy thinks for a second and says, "Last week my wife ran off with a cop. I was afraid you were trying to give her back." "Have a nice weekend," said the officer, and he walked away. There once was a woman named 90. She was a part of a family that had 100 children, so her mother named the children the numbers 100. One day, a freak accident killed all of the family but 90. She grew up and had 2 children. The 2 kids found a dog and wanted to keep it, but 90 doesn't like dogs. To work around this, the kids named the dog This. That way they could say phrases like, "Let's go play with this," and prevent 90 from knowing. Unfortunately, this died when it was run over by a car, but 90 never knew about the dog. Only 90's kids remember this. Grandma Helen was startled awake by the smell of coffee and the sight of her 8-year-old grandson Johnny beaming with pride as he held out a steaming cup. "Good morning, Grandma. I made you coffee all by myself," Johnny exclaimed. Touched by his effort, Helen smiled warmly. "Thank you, sweetheart." "You're so thoughtful." She took a sip, trying to hide her grimace as the bitter, almost undrinkable coffee hit her taste buds. But she drank it all anyway, her love for Johnny stronger than her need for sugar or cream. As she finished the cup, she noticed something odd clinking at the bottom. Peering inside, she found 3 little green army men submerged in the last bit of liquid. Confused, she looked at Johnny. "Honey, why are there toy soldiers in my coffee?" Johnny's face lit up with excitement. "I just did what the TV said, Grandma. The best part of waking up is soldiers in your cup." Helen burst into laughter, pulling Johnny into a big hug. "Well, darling, this is definitely the most memorable cup of coffee I've ever had." From that day on, Helen couldn't help but smile every time she saw those little green army men on the kitchen counter, a reminder of her grandson's love and his amusing interpretation of a catchy jingle. A lady stumbled into the police station one night. A woman walked into the police station sporting a black eye. She explained that she had heard a strange noise coming from her backyard and went outside to check it out. The next thing she knew, she was struck in the eye and knocked out. An officer was dispatched to investigate the scene. An hour later, he returned with a matching black eye. "Did the same person get you?" his captain asked. "No," the officer replied, rubbing his face. "I stepped on the same rake." Ted, a farmer, had a nagging wife who made his life miserable. The only peace he ever found was out in the field, working with his old donkey. One day, while Ted was ploughing, his wife brought him lunch. But instead of letting him eat in silence, she launched into her usual routine of nagging and complaining about everything. As Ted quietly ate his sandwich, the donkey suddenly kicked up its back legs and, wham, hit her right in the head, killing her instantly. At her funeral, the local priest noticed something peculiar. Whenever the women came to offer their condolences, Ted nodded his head up and down. But when the men approached and whispered to him, he shook his head side to side. Curious, the priest approached Ted after the service and asked, "Ted, I couldn't help but notice. Why were you nodding to the women and shaking your head at the men?" Ted gave a small shrug. "Well, Father, the women all said how lovely she looked in her dress, and I agreed. But the men..." He paused with a smirk. "They all wanted to know if the donkey was for sale." An elderly lady was bracing herself at the railing of a cruise ship, clutching her hat tightly as the wind whipped around her. A gentleman approached, his face filled with concern. "Pardon me, madam, but I must tell you, your dress is blowing up in this strong wind," he said politely. "Yes, I'm aware," she replied, her grip still firm on her hat. "I need both hands to hold on to it." "But madam," the gentleman continued, a hint of urgency in his voice, "you're not wearing anything under your dress, and your privates are exposed." The lady glanced down and then back up at him with a twinkle in her eye. "Sir," she said with a smile, "anything you see down there is 90 years old. I just bought this hat yesterday." During a classroom discussion, the principal decided to pose a challenging question to the students. Principal: "All right, class. Can anyone tell me, when do girls grow up?" Little Johnny, always ready with a response, stood up and confidently said, "When they begin wearing bras." The principal, though a bit taken aback, nodded and said, "That's one way to look at it. Now tell me, when do boys grow up?" Without hesitation, Johnny, with a mischievous grin, replied, "When they start taking those off." A wife was in the middle of preparing breakfast, frying eggs for her husband. Suddenly, he stormed into the kitchen, panic written all over his face. "Be careful, careful, you need more butter. Too many eggs. Way too many at once. Turn them now." He was practically shouting as he moved closer to the stove. "We need more butter. We're going to run out. They're going to stick. Oh my God, what are you doing? Turn them. Don't you ever listen when you cook? Ever?" The wife, standing frozen, stared at him in disbelief. "What is going on with you? I know how to fry eggs. You think I don't?" The husband took a deep breath, his expression settling into one of calm realization. "I just wanted to show you what it feels like when I'm driving." He's now recovering in the hospital. Little Johnny was often teased by the neighborhood boys, who thought he was not very bright. Their favorite trick was to offer Johnny a choice between a nickel and a dime. Johnny always chose the nickel, much to their amusement. One day, after Johnny had once again picked the nickel, a kind neighbor pulled him aside and said, "Johnny, don't you realize that a dime is worth more than a nickel, even though the nickel is bigger?" Johnny flashed a mischievous grin and replied, "Of course I know that. But if I took the dime, they'd stop offering me money. So far, I've made $20. What do you think of this version?" A man owned a small ranch in Montana. One day, the labor department got a tip that he wasn't paying proper wages to his employees. So they sent an investigator to find out what's going on. "Please tell me how many employees you have, and how much you pay them," the investigator asked the rancher. The rancher replied, "My ranch hand has been with me 3 years, and I pay him $1,200 per week, plus a free room and board. The cook has been here a year, and I pay him $1,000 per week, plus a free room and board. And there is a half-wit. He works 18 hours a day with no days off, doing about 90% of the work around here. He makes about $10 per week and pays for his own room and board, although I buy him a bottle of bourbon every Saturday night. He also sleeps with my wife occasionally. The investigator said, "Uh-huh. That's the fool I demand to speak with." The rancher replied, "You're speaking to him." A dinner speaker was in a hurry to get to his engagement. When he arrived and sat down at the head table, he suddenly realized that he had forgotten his false teeth. Turning to the man next to him, he whispered, "I forgot my teeth." The man said, "No problem." With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of false teeth. "Try these," he said. The speaker tried them. "Thanks, but they're too loose," he said. The man then said, "I have another pair, try these." The speaker tried them and responded, "Too tight." The man was not taken back at all. He then said, "I have one more pair of false teeth, try these." This time the speaker said, "They fit perfectly." With that, he ate his meal, then delivered his address to the crowd. After the dinner meeting was over, the speaker went over to thank the man who had helped him. "I want to thank you for coming to my aid. Where is your office? I've been looking for a good dentist." The man replied, "I'm not a dentist. I'm a mortician." A very intoxicated Irishman wobbles into a police station. His face is smeared with dried blood, and a makeshift bandage hangs loosely from his forehead. The officer, trying to remain professional, can't help but raise an eyebrow at the man's current state. "What happened to you?" asks the officer. The Irishman looks down at himself, then back at the officer. "I was attacked." "All right, sir," says the officer, clicking his pen and flipping open his notepad. "Let's get to the bottom of this. Can you describe the person who did this to you?" The Irishman leans forward, as if preparing to deliver a profound piece of wisdom. He sways a little, squinting at the officer with exaggerated focus. "Aye, I can describe him perfectly," he declares, his voice a mix of pride and slurred defiance. The officer perks up. "Good, let's hear it." The Irishman wobbles to one side, but regains his balance, lifting a finger, as if to deliver a lecture. "Well, you see, he's about yay tall." He gestures ambiguously, his hand swaying in the air. "With a nose like a camel and a face that has the permanent expression of someone who just smelled burnt toast." The officer blinks, trying to process. "And you're sure of that?" he asks. "Well," says the Irishman, "that's what I told him anyway." Boy, how many apples can you eat in empty stomach? Girl, I can eat 6 apples. Boy, you can eat only 1 apple in empty stomach BCOZ when you eat the second apple that's not an empty stomach. Girl, wow, super joke. I'll tell my friend. Girl to other girl, how many apple can you eat in empty stomach? Other girl, I can eat 10. Girl, pagal 6 bolti Thomas joke sunati. A man has a heart attack and is brought to the hospital ER. The doctor tells him that he will not live unless he has a heart transplant right away. Another doctor runs into the room and says, "You're in luck. 2 hearts just became available, so you will get to choose which one you want. One belongs to an attorney, and the other to a social worker." The man quickly responds, "The attorneys." The doctor says, "Wait, don't you want to know a little about them before you make your decision?" The man says, "I already know enough. We all know that social workers are bleeding hearts, and the attorneys probably never used his. So I'll take the attorneys." Gladys was the wife of the Reverend John Donne and accompanied her husband each Sunday to church. After an exceptionally long sermon one Sunday, she approached a bored-duking newcomer and introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Gladys Dunn." To which the gentleman replied, "You're not the only one." 60 is the worst age to be, said the 60-year-old man. You always feel like you have to pee, and most of the time you stand there and nothing comes out. "Ah, that's nothing," said the 70-year-old. "When you're 70, you don't have a bowel movement anymore. You take laxatives, eat bran, sit on the toilet all day, and nothing comes out." "Actually," said the 80-year-old, 80 is the worst age of all." "Do you have trouble peeing too?" asked the 60-year-old. "No, I pee every morning at 6 o'clock. I pee like a racehorse on a flat rock, no problem at all." "So do you have a problem with your bowel movement?" "No, I have one every morning at 6:30. Exasperated, the 60-year-old said, "You pee every morning at 6 o'clock and crap every morning at 6:30. So what's so bad about being 80? "I don't wake up until 7 o'clock. A judge was interviewing an Alabama woman regarding her pending divorce and asked, "What are the grounds for your divorce?" "About 4 acres and a nice little home in the middle of the property with a stream running by," she replied. The judge, trying to clarify, said, "No, I mean, what is the foundation of this case?" "It's made of concrete, brick and mortar," she answered. The judge took a deep breath and continued, "What are your relations like?" "I have an aunt and uncle and 12 cousins living here in town, as well as my husband's parents," she said matter-of-factly. Exasperated, the judge asked, "Do you have a real grudge?" "No, we have a 2-car carport, but we've never really needed one since we don't own a car." "Please," he tried again, "is there any infidelity in your marriage?" "Yes, both my son and daughter have stereo sets. We don't really like the music, too much hip-hop and rap, but we can't seem to do anything about it." "Ma'am, does your husband ever beat you up?" he inquired, hoping for a straightforward answer. "Yes," she replied. "He gets up every morning before I do and makes the coffee." Finally, in frustration, the judge asked, "Lady, why in the world do you want a divorce?" "Oh, I don't want a divorce," she replied. "I've never wanted one. My husband does. The darn fool says he can't communicate with me." Little Johnny asks the teacher, "Can I be punished for something I haven't done?" The teacher is shocked. "Of course not, Johnny. That would be very unfair." Johnny is relieved. "That's good to know," he says, "because I haven't done my homework." I was on vacation in Florida on Christmas vacation. I was walking down the beach and I see one of my colleagues approaching me. He is a psychologist. "You had breakfast yet?" I ask. "No. Let's find a place." "Good," he says. "My car is right over there." I get in his car, a brand new Lincoln, and right away, I notice that it's a stick shift. I say, "You bought a new Lincoln with a stick shift? I didn't know that they made a Lincoln like that." "They don't," he says. "I ordered it special." "I'll bet that cost a fortune," I reply. "Oh yeah, you got that right." "Why would you buy a new Lincoln with a stick shift?" I ask. He says, "My wife can't drive a stick." Observing from a distance, the store manager watches with concern as a salesperson engages in a heated exchange with a disgruntled customer. After a few tense minutes, the customer storms out of the store, leaving behind a notable air of frustration. Approaching the salesperson with a furrowed brow, the manager's disapproval is clearly evident. "I saw what just happened," the manager begins, his tone tinged with disappointment. "And it seems you've forgotten our motto. The customer is always right." Apologizing, the salesperson attempts to explain, but the manager cuts them off firmly. "No excuses. The customer is always right." With a resigned nod, the salesperson accepts the rebuke, understanding the importance of prioritizing customer satisfaction. Curiosity aroused, the manager presses on. "What exactly were you two arguing about?" Reluctantly, the salesperson admits, "Well, you see, sir, he called you an idiot,